So I'm just letting everybody in. And those are ready to make a start. Okay, I'm just going to make a start and more people might join us in the event. Hello everyone, and welcome to the special event for Scottish Housing Day. We're focusing on housing and the climate emergency. This event and the whole Housing Day actually is organised by a group of partners. It's a real partnership and teamwork. I hope I don't forget anybody, but it's organised by Aberdeen City-wide multi-storey group, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, CIH Scotland, Citizens Advice Scotland, Existing Homes Alliance Scotland, Homes for Scotland, the Scottish Association of Landlords, the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, the Scottish Government, TPAS, Under One Roof, and Weekly Group. So it's a real mix of organisations across the housing sector, which really reflects the topic today. The climate emergency affects every corner of the housing sector and everybody across Scotland. I'm Ashley Campbell. I'm the Policy and Practice Manager at the Chartered Institute of Housing in Scotland, and I'll be your host for the afternoon. And just before we get started with the speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping to go through. The session is being recorded today, so we'll send you a copy after the event and it will be available on the CIH website as well. So just be aware that if you're asking a question, it is being recorded. I'm sure you're all used to online events by now, but the usual rules apply. Can you all keep your microphones on mute if you're not speaking, just to cut down on background noise. There will be time for questions after each of the speakers today, so feel free during the sessions to pop question or comment in the chat box and we'll try and get round to them. And if you want to ask the speaker a question after the presentation, if you can pop your hand up using the icon at the top of your screen, it's a little smiley face with a wavy hand, and I'll come to you to ask your question. So as I said, we're here to talk about housing and the climate emergency. We all know that it's a massive challenge and we've got a really great lineup of speakers for you today to talk about different aspects of that challenge and different solutions to housing and the climate emergency. We'll be starting off with Shona Robertson, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Housing and Local Government. We'll be talking about the Scottish Government's approach to becoming a net zero nation. We have Shona till about 2:30, so if you want to have a think about getting your questions ready to make sure we've got time, please have a think now. Following Shona, we'll be speaking to Gillian Campbell, who is the Communications and Public Affairs Lead for the Existing Homes Alliance Scotland. And Gillian's going to be talking about some new research that was commissioned by the Housing Day partners with support from ACO. After Gillian, we'll be joined by David Simpson. He's the Head of Housing and Communications at Dundee City Council. He's speaking on behalf of Alacho, and he's going to be talking about the approach that different local authorities are taking across Scotland and some of the challenges there. We'll then be joined by Callum Murray, who's the Director of CCG Scotland, and he'll be looking at some of the innovative techniques that the housing development sector are using to produce new homes of the future for net zero. And we'll be rounding off with Sam Mills, who is the Head of Fuel Poverty Reduction at Changeworks. And Sam is just going to talk a little bit about the importance of not forgetting about fuel poverty when we're talking about investing this money in climate change, in retrofit and energy efficiency. We need to make sure that we are not forgetting the people that are living in the homes themselves. So I am going to hand straight over to Shona. As I said, we don't have a lot of time, so Cabinet Secretary, if you want to take the microphone, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and hello everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this climate emergency event today. Scottish Housing Day, and a good Scottish Housing Day to you, is an important event in Scotland's housing sector calendar. This is the 6th year, I understand, and it's been obviously held during Scotland Climate Week 2021 and 7 weeks in advance of the UN Climate Conference COP26 in Glasgow. So it's only right that the focus should be on housing and its contribution to the climate emergency. I'm encouraged by the number of events that are taking place as part of Scottish Housing Day, and I want to applaud the engagement evident within the sector. It provides an opportunity for discussion and raises awareness of the challenges that we face collectively to achieve net zero, while continuing to provide affordable quality homes that meet people's needs. Taking place in Scotland in November, as I said, is COP26, and it's our best opportunity to tackle the twin issues of biodiversity loss and climate change. COP26 has to move the world from rhetoric to reality and mobilise the action, the finance, resources and joint working to deliver on the Paris Agreement goals, with more governments committing to net zero and taking concrete steps to achieve their goals, supported by our Net Zero Futures initiative. The Scottish Government will use our position as co-chair of the Under 2 Coalition to help deliver ambitious outcomes at COP26 and demonstrate that the global climate action cannot be met without action by governments at all levels. We must also showcase our own action and show that responding to the climate emergency means setting bold cross-government targets for transport, energy supply, green homes and buildings, delivering an ambitious planning system that will support the achievement of net zero carbon emissions by 2045. This is the second opportunity I've had today to talk about how Scotland aims to achieve net zero by 2045 and the important contribution required by the housing sector. It's our aim to maximise the housing's contribution to Scotland's green recovery, and we estimate that the total investment in buildings that will be required to align with our net zero targets will be in the region of £33 billion. Now, the scale of this investment presents a challenge to us all across the public and private sector alike, but it also presents a very significant opportunity to boost local economies and create good green jobs, and will involve a significant ramp up of the capability and capacity of supply chains in Scotland. The Scottish Government has a number of initiatives underway to work in partnership with the housing sector to tackle the challenges of achieving net zero in the housing context, and the social housing sector, not for the first time, is leading the way in many respects. These include Housing to 2040, our heat and building strategies, and the energy efficiency standards, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. You'll know that, obviously, I'd be well familiar with Housing to 2040, published back in March, which is Scotland's first ever long-term housing strategy, and it recognises the vital role that housing plays in meeting other objectives for people in Scotland, such as tackling poverty and inequality, creating and supporting jobs, stemming depopulation, ensuring that we meet our energy efficiency and fuel poverty targets, and of course tackling the climate emergency and making sure we have connected, cohesive communities to live in. It sets out a vision for what we want homes and communities to look and feel like for the people of Scotland, no matter where they live and what point in their life they are at. It's a vision where homes are affordable for everyone, where standards are the same across tenures, where homes have easy access to green space. That's been very important during the pandemic, where there's good transport links, digital connectivity, community services, and where homelessness, child poverty and fuel poverty have been eradicated in a fair and just way. Sitting alongside the draft heat and building strategy, we will ensure both work together to deliver our statutory targets for climate change and fuel poverty, homes that are warm and affordable to heat with reduced emissions caused by housing and its construction. We will have to change not just how we heat our homes, but how we build them, and we'll publish the final heat and building strategy soon. Housing to 2040 is, of course, the culmination of extensive engagement with the housing sector, which I thank you for, wider stakeholders and the public in general. We couldn't have written it alone, and similarly, we can't now deliver the Housing to 2040 ambitions alone, and we will continue to work with local authorities, housing providers, landlords, and the construction and house building sectors to achieve them. The financial implications of the agreed Housing to 2040 commitments and the shared Scottish Government Scottish Green Party policy programme will of course be settled as part of the budget setting process, but it is very much a top priority. We want all new homes to achieve zero emissions, and this will avoid expensive future retrofit and speed up our carbon reduction efforts. We've actively worked with industry through our independently co-chaired external working group, which led to the implementation of the 2024 new build heat standard. This and our programme for government sets out our commitment to work with the construction sector towards ensuring that all new homes receiving a warrant from 2024 must use heat systems which produce zero direct emissions at the point of use. The purpose of this, as I said earlier, is to avoid expensive future retrofit of new buildings. Ahead of this, we are revising building regulations this year, which will improve the energy performance of the building fabric itself and incentivise energy efficiency. Other changes being consulted on include changes to how heat connections are considered, changes to ventilation, overheating, improving and demonstrating compliance with energy standards, and adding new requirements to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure. There are no silver bullets or easy solutions to the heat in buildings challenge, and we have to use all the tools available to increase awareness, secure delivery and provide the certainty that individuals in the sector need to take action. And we also have to achieve this in a way that's fair to everyone, a just transition to net zero. And different challenges exist across different sectors, and there has to be flexibility to determine local solutions, for example, in more remote, rural and island communities. To meet the building sector emissions target in the climate change plan, at least 1.2 million existing buildings need to switch to zero emissions heat supply by 2030 and the remaining 1.5 million by 2045 to reach net zero. Currently, there are an estimated 3,000 zero emissions heat installations each year, so we've got a way to go. The Heat Network Scotland Act 2021 sets statutory targets for heat network deployment in 2027 and 2030, which are equivalent to a broadly estimated 120,000 and 650,000 additional homes being connected to heat networks. And these figures will be updated with more detailed scenarios looking at non-domestic and industrial connections as far as possible. And we will support people to convert their heating systems to zero emission ones, targeting that help at those least able to pay. Overall, we estimate that as investment ramps up towards the late 2020s, as many as 24,000 jobs could be supported each year in Scotland by the rollout of zero emissions heat. At least £1.8 billion of capital funding is being made available over the next 5 years to kickstart the transformation of Scotland's homes and buildings, allowing us to accelerate energy efficiency upgrades and renewable heating deployment and creating new jobs and supply chain opportunities across Scotland as we go forward. The draft heat and building strategy, which I talked about earlier, sets out actions to decarbonise Scotland's building stock in line with our legislated climate change targets. And to lead by example, we will aim for all new homes delivered by RSLs and local authorities to be zero emission homes by 2026. We're already working with stakeholders to develop a zero emissions new build affordable home strategy to deliver this ambitious target. And we are establishing a national public energy agency to drive delivery programmes, and a virtual agency will be set up within the next year. So our work to decarbonise our homes offers opportunities to modernise construction, particularly off-site construction, which is one of the most important tools we have to achieve the quality of home build and the exacting energy efficiency standards needed to meet our net zero targets. And modernising the house building industry will not only support net zero, but it will also bring the benefits of a more diverse workforce, more digitisation, speedier development, greater benefits for communities and improved health and safety. But of course, we can't just make our new homes energy efficient. We face a significant challenge to reduce the emissions created by the homes we already have. Alongside widespread use of fossil fuel heating systems, many homes still have poor energy efficiency and are expensive to heat. The Zero Emissions Social Housing Task Force, ZEST, was an independent stakeholder group that was set up in March by the former Minister for Housing to consider and provide practical recommendations on what is required to achieve a just transition towards the targets. Their report, published at the end of August, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, sets out clear recommendations to support the next steps in the decarbonisation of heating across all social housing. Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, and I met with the group's co-chair ahead of the publication, and we welcomed the report, and we very much recognise the great work that has been done by ZEST and thank them for it. They were now carefully considering the recommendations and how best to align them with emerging plans. One of the key themes in the report is a fabric-first approach, and this aligns with the Energy Efficiency Standard, which we introduced in 2014. And they've recommended that the EESSH review should be carried out in 2023 ahead of the current planned date to help the Scottish Government and landlords work together to plan ahead with certainty. For our existing homes, we want to see them adapted and retrofitted to improve their energy efficiency and to decarbonise their heating to achieve an Energy Performance Certificate Band C rating within the limit of cost, technology and necessary consent. The new EESSH milestones for 2032 push this even further and sees all social housing meeting an Energy Performance Certificate Band B rating. Social landlords, again, are leading the way, with 89% of social rented homes already meeting the first standard for social housing, and many landlords are already working towards the next milestone. In our transition to net zero, we will improve the heating and insulation of existing homes and remove poor energy efficiency as a driver for fuel poverty. The result will be a housing sector that helps to establish a successful low-carbon economy across Scotland, which is a really good goal to aim towards. The energy efficiency standard for social housing is absolutely crucial. It's a crucial part of the energy efficiency of Energy Efficient Scotland, the cornerstone of the Scottish Government's designation of energy efficiency as a national infrastructure priority, setting out a 15 to 20-year programme of energy efficiency measures for our homes and to make them warmer, greener and more efficient. Clearly, there are challenges ahead in the achievement of this vision. For example, the development of the technology, the skills and workforce, raising awareness and ensuring appropriate legislation across all tenures of housing. I'm pleased that the Social Housing Net Zero Heat Fund, launched last year, reopened in August. We've committed £100 million over the next 5 years to accelerate the delivery of energy efficiency measures and zero emission heating systems in existing social housing stock through projects across Scotland using a blended model of capital, grant and loan funding. A £10 million boost for the current financial year has been specifically targeted towards fabric first energy efficiency measures ahead of installing zero emissions heating in later years. And I encourage any projects with potential for deployment to explore the support available and to help us realise the continuing potential of zero emission heating systems across Scotland. We want to work with you, the sector, to assess the impact of funding to date and ensure that it effectively supports further acceleration of the decarbonisation of our housing stock, and will continue to consider how this financial support will work in tandem with our domestic energy efficiency problems. I just also want to acknowledge the research commissioned by the Scottish Housing Day partners, and I'm pleased that it showed a high level of awareness of the Scottish Government's target to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. And I'll be looking closely at the full findings of the report and will read with interest what it says about awareness and attitudes towards housing and the climate emergency. And finally, achieving net zero is truly an enormous responsibility that will require sustained international cooperation and bold action. We've committed to achieve this by 2045. I've outlined today some of the key commitments and actions that the government is already taking and is planning to take. And of course, importantly, we welcome your continued support and engagement in helping to realise these ambitious targets and to meet the challenges of this head on. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. There are a couple of questions in the chat box, but I'm just going to I've used my position as chair to maybe ask a question myself. You reflected there on just the sheer scale of ambition and the challenges ahead, which are quite staggering. We're talking about millions of homes needing upgraded and moving towards low and zero carbon heating. We're talking about tens of billions of pounds of investment. And as you quite rightly said, the social housing sector has been working on this for a number of years. They've been investing in upgrading homes. Homes in the social sector are more energy efficient than in other sectors, but they only make up about a quarter of all homes. So about 3/4 of our housing stock is in the private rented sector and home ownership. And I know that the pandemic has put a lot of things on hold over the last 18 months. We were expecting regulations for minimum standards in the private rented sector last year, and we're still looking at consultation on minimum standards for home owners. Do you think that we're going to have time? Is there enough time to allow landlords and owners to look at their options, to look at the different finance models and be able to plan for these big changes that they're going to have to make?
Well, clearly the pandemic has not been helpful in that regard in so many ways, and has put back or has slowed down some of the work that was ongoing. So we need to pick up the pace, and we need to pick up the pace quickly in order to move forward. You're absolutely right to identify that 3/4 of the stock is in sectors other than the social rented sector. That brings a number of challenges. It creates an opportunity for yourselves to lead by example, though, and to showcase and show what can be done. Clearly, we will need to make sure that we're working with private landlords in terms of their responsibilities, and we have to work through that over the next few months. I think we have opportunities around the rented sector strategy as we take that forward. There will be a housing bill that will follow that, and we need to look at whether further legislative changes are required. Home ownership is also challenging. I think the first thing we need to do is to raise better awareness among the public about the need to move on and change the heating systems. We've got some work to do there, I think, to make sure the public understand the reasons why this is important. And I should add, it's not just our government that needs to step up to the plate here. The UK government also needs to step up to the plate, and it will be interesting to see whether there are any announcements that they might make around COP26 in that regard. But this is going to be a big effort on everybody's part in order to make sure we meet these very, very ambitious targets in a timescale which is extremely challenging.
Thank you. I don't see any hands up just now, so I'm going to go to the chat box and look at a couple of questions. Joyce Orr has posted a comment which is quite a challenge for the social housing sector just now, about the amount of funding that's going in to support social landlords to make these improvements to homes. I think the latest EISH statistics showed that about 86% of the funding was put forward by social landlords themselves. So when the social landlords are making those investments, that's ultimately being paid for through borrowing, which is tenants' rents. So at some point, if social landlords are being asked to invest too much, that cost could be passed on to tenants, and there's a danger of rents creeping up and therefore putting people in danger of poverty or fuel poverty. Do you have anything to say about the Scottish Government's plans for investment to support organisations?
Yeah, so first of all, a principle here that is an important one, and that is that the just transition is that it is a just transition, therefore cannot be done on the backs of those who are on the lowest incomes. We cannot be in a situation where we're driving more people into fuel poverty. We have to do the reverse of that. So we've got a number of balls to keep in the air and do at the same time, but that principle is absolute. So the way we do this has to be done in a way that does not impact on fuel poverty in a negative way. I talked about a number of funds that will be available. I talked about big numbers in terms of investment. The Social Housing Net Zero Heat Fund, which is, as I said, has just reopened, is making available a total of £100 million over the next 5 years to support social landlords across Scotland to install zero emission heating systems and energy efficiency measures across the existing housing stock. So it gets money working in the system to get on with that. And this financial year, there's an enhanced budget of £10 million to, I guess, demonstrate, how this can work. So it's important that we get energy efficiency projects which can demonstrate that they're taking a fabric first approach with the intention of installing zero emission heating systems technologies in following years, many of which are still being developed. And I guess that is one of the challenges. There are systems out there, and of course there are district heating systems that have been around for a while, but there are still technological advances being made all the time in this area. And as the sector, the green energy sector sees the resources and recognises the resources that are going to be invested, more and more technological advances will be made as resources are put into the development of that technology. So yes is the short answer, but we need to make sure that that is able to meet the needs of the sector going forward.
Thank you. I know that commitment to just transition and making sure that we don't make anybody worse off is really, really important, and the social rented sector certainly is taking that very seriously. We've maybe just got time for one more question, and David Somerville has put a couple of questions in the chat box about co-housing specifically, cooperative and co-housing, and you've got your hand up, David, so do you want to come in with a quick question for the Cabinet Secretary?
Thank you so much. It's very appropriate that you've spoken so passionately about fuel poverty, about other housing initiatives that are going to deliver net zero. My question is, as a trustee of Co-Housing Scotland, if there's an opportunity, a possibility in the enhanced programme to provide for some plurality in the housing provision, that would be a midway between the private house builders for profit and the social housing. We're unusual in the UK of having so much reliance on the big house builders, and in many other countries, Austria, 60% of all housing being delivered in the much smaller units, and so on. So that's co-housing and other community and cooperative housing options. How do you see these potentially fitting in, and would you consider exploring these?
Yes, I would. I'm always looking for new ideas, and we had a commitment, I think, within the Green Agreement to support housing cooperatives, and we also, when you look at remote and rural Scotland, there are many community-led, quite small scale in some cases, but very imaginative ways of coming up with housing solutions for local communities. And I think we need to do all of that. We need to think outside the box. We need to help communities to develop their own solutions, and I'm keen to think more about that. And if you want to email me, David, with some more of your thoughts on that, I would be pleased to receive that.
Thank you very much. Certainly all power to Community Housing Trust and South of Scotland Community Housing, but they're rural, and of course most people live in the central, but in urban context, so it's that opportunity. We'll certainly be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks for your contribution, David. I see there's one more comment in the chat box from Tony Kane about how we'll know if the transition is just or not. I don't think we've got time to go into that question today, Tony, but that's maybe something for the Cabinet Secretary to take away and look at how we're measuring the impact, how we're making sure that social tenants or other tenants or homeowners on low income are not negatively impacted by this, and how we'll measure that. So I think that's us at time. So just to say thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, for joining us today. Do you want to make any last comments, or?
On that last point, we can get something back to you for distribution, but that's an important point in terms of measuring. And of course, we do have fuel poverty targets already, but we need to make sure we measure that. Just a big thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for the work that you've done in the sector, and thank you for the work that you will do in partnership with us to deliver these really ambitious targets. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you for joining us. You're more than welcome to stay, but I'm sure you're very busy and might be getting whisked off to another event as we speak.
I will, unfortunately, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
See you later. Bye.
Thank you. We are going to move straight on. We have got a lot to get through in the next hour. So next we're going to hear from Gillian Campbell, who's the Communications and Public Affairs Lead at Existing Homes Alliance Scotland. And Gillian's going to be talking about the new research that's been published today that was commissioned by the Housing Day partners. I think you've got a presentation to share, Gillian.
I have. Thank you, Ashley. So hopefully this will work. Okay. How's this looking?
That is it. We've got you, Gillian.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ashley. I'm delighted to be able to share some of the findings from this piece of research, and do hope that it helps to shape what's going to be a very busy time in terms of policy development over the coming months. First of all, we know that homes account for around 13% of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're going to meet our climate change targets of reducing emissions by 75% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2045, we need to tackle homes. And while there have been improvements that can and will be made to energy efficiency and emissions from new homes, more than 80% of homes that will be in use by 2050 have already been built. So we really need to be tackling existing homes. The draft heat and building strategy that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned earlier was published earlier this year, and identified that we need to upgrade around 1 million homes by 2030 if we're going to meet our targets. But how aware are Scotland's tenants and homeowners about how their homes contribute to climate change? And what do they know about the changes that they can expect to see in the coming years? To understand this, Scottish Housing Day partners commissioned a poll with support from ACO, and we're very grateful for their support. We'll get on to the results shortly, but first of all, I wanted to give you a little bit of background and context. So as I'm sure you all know, every home in Scotland that's built, sold or rented must have an Energy Performance Certificate, or EPC, which shows the energy efficiency rating and environmental impact on a rating system from a low of G to a high of A. And the Scottish Government has an aim to increase the vast majority of homes to be at least EPC-C by now 2033, and a target of EPC-B for social rented homes where possible. This chart shows that across all tenures, the bulk of homes fall into the bands C and D categories. And it shows that social rented sector is the best performing sector in terms of EPC ratings, with 56% at EPC-C or above. And this compares to 42% in owner-occupied sector and 40% in the private rented sector. This second chart shows greenhouse gas emissions from new builds and existing homes. Improvements in building standards and technology have led to a reduction in emissions from new build, although there is still further to go, and new regulations will require all new homes consented from 2024 to include zero emissions heating. But what this slide shows us is that the biggest challenge in cutting emissions in Scotland's homes lies with existing homes, and in particular in the owner-occupied and private rented sectors. So what's the cost of doing all this? Well, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned earlier that the Heat and Building Strategy estimates it will cost up to around £33 billion to transform 1 million homes and 50,000 non-domestic buildings through installing low or zero emissions heating by 2030. And while the Scottish Government's committed to invest £1.8 billion over the next 5 years, it's clear that the bulk of this funding is going to have to come from the private sector, and most of it in particular is going to have to come from homeowners paying for the upgrades of these homes. The Scottish Government estimates that the average cost of bringing a home up to EPC-C is around £6,000, but it can be up to £11,000 for rural homes. And in addition, replacing heating systems with low carbon systems could add an additional £3,000 to £5,000 per home. So are people prepared for these changes? Well, there have been a number of studies which have been published in recent months, but many of these relate to quite general attitudes towards climate change across the UK and don't address the specifics of climate change and housing in Scotland. So to help inform the policy development in Scotland, the Scottish Housing Day partners decided to commission Progressive Partnership to carry out research into levels of public awareness and attitudes. The research was based on an online survey of 1,005 people, with the sample being representative of Scotland's over 18 population, weighted for age, gender, religion and socio-economic grade. The survey also asked questions about tenure, type and age of homes so we could understand where there might be differences in awareness and whether resources need to be targeted differently for different tenures. So what did the research tell us? We asked people whether they were aware, first of all, of the Scottish Government's target to reach net zero emissions by 2045. And the good news is the majority were. 69% across all tenures had heard of the plans, with homeowners being the most likely to be aware. 73% of homeowners were aware of the plans compared to 64% of private tenants and 62% of social rented tenants. Only 26% weren't aware of the plans at all. So I think that's a pretty good start. Respondents were then asked to estimate the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions produced by homes, which, as I mentioned earlier, is around 13% of all emissions in Scotland. Only 13% of people selected the correct range of between 11 and 20%, and around half of people overestimated the proportion of greenhouse gas emissions generated by homes, and 32% indicated that they didn't know. Private renters, interestingly, were the most likely to select the correct proportion, and social renters were the most likely to say that they didn't know. We asked people whether they were aware of the current EPC rating of their current home. And the vast majority reported that they had heard of EPC ratings, 81% had heard of EPC ratings, but only 18% indicated that they knew what the EPC was of their current home. People living in social housing showed less awareness than average, with 39% reporting they'd never heard of the EPC rating system. We then asked people whether they were aware of the Scottish Government's plans to introduce minimum energy efficiency standards. Again, most respondents, 67%, were aware of the Scottish Government plans to introduce minimum energy efficiency standards, but only 11% thought that they knew what these standards might be in relation to their own house type. Moving from questions about awareness to questions about attitude. We asked people about the importance of living in an energy efficient home, and we asked whether energy efficiency was an important factor when they chose their current home. Half of all respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement that energy efficiency was an important factor in choosing their home. Private tenants were most likely to value the energy efficiency of their home when choosing it, with 15% agreeing with that statement. 56% of homeowners disagreed or strongly disagreed that energy efficiency was an important factor when choosing their home. Now, we have to realise that times are changing, and I think awareness has changed and increased over the last couple of years in particular, so it might be that this is increasing, because on the positive side, about 39% of people indicated across all tenures that they would like to move to a more energy efficient home. So it may be that it is moving up the agenda and people are becoming more aware of it as an issue. Again, private tenants are most likely to say that they would like to move to a more energy efficient home, with 66% agreeing with that statement, compared to 37% for social housing tenants and 30% of homeowners. And owners of flats were more likely to want to move to an energy efficient home than owners of houses, with 34% responding positively compared to 28% of houses. Homeowners also indicated that there were significant barriers to making improvements to their homes in order to reduce household emissions. 63% said they would like to make improvements to their home but couldn't afford to. And nearly half of homeowners think it's difficult to access information on how to make improvements, and 38% indicated that improvements would be too difficult to organise. Only 22% of homeowners said that they do plan to make improvements to ensure their homes meet minimum energy efficiency standards. Perhaps not surprisingly, it's homeowners in flats that are most likely to indicate that it would be too difficult to organise improvements to their homes, with 41% of respondents in flats agreeing with that statement. We also asked homeowners how much they thought it might cost to bring their home up to the minimum energy efficiency standard. A significant number were not sure, 34% were not sure, and of those who did make an estimate, there was a wide variety of views, as you can see from this chart. Interestingly, though, some of the differences did reflect age and type of home, suggesting that homeowners do have some appreciation of how these factors can affect the energy efficiency of the home. Then finally, onto the question of who should cover the cost of improving homes to meet energy efficiency standards. The vast majority of people across all tenures think that the Scottish Government should cover at least some of the costs. And of these people, 34% think that the Scottish Government should cover all of the costs, and 26% think they should cover most of the costs. Only 3% don't think that the Scottish Government should provide any financial support for homeowners or private landlords. And 6% of respondents think that the Scottish Government should allow people to apply for a loan to help cover costs. And again, there's a sort of house type and tenure issue here. So homeowners living in houses rather than flats are more likely to think that the Scottish Government should pay for all costs. There was another option for this question, and there were some quite interesting comments in the other section here, including suggestions that oil and gas companies should be required to contribute to the costs, that the Scottish Government should provide financial assistance for a person's primary residence only, not for second homes, comments around means testing of grant funding, and exploring other incentives such as tax reductions for more energy efficient homes. The final question we asked was around whether homeowners were planning to replace their existing heating system with a low or zero carbon alternative. Worryingly, given the targets and what we're trying to achieve over the next decade, the vast majority, 69%, said they had no plans to replace their current heating system. And 16% of owners were unsure. 7% are considering replacing their heating system with a ground source or air source heat pump, hydrogen-ready boiler, solar or wind power, and only 2% say they're already using a low-emissions heating system. Again, there was another option here, and other comments included nervousness and uncertainty about what people should replace their gas boilers with, what kind of systems they should be replacing them with, but also that replacement heating systems were conflicting with other priorities, other household priorities, and areas that need to be addressed in the home. What can we conclude from the research? Well, first of all, our research, along with that of other researchers, showed that while people are generally very supportive of taking action to tackle climate change, there is a real disconnect between the broad aspirations and the reality of what it means for people and their homes. Very few people were aware of what net zero means in relation to their homes and what they might need to do, and importantly, what they might need to spend to reach net zero. So we need to shift how people value energy efficiency of their homes. Good energy efficiency should be one of the core considerations when people are choosing their new home. The Scottish Government's draft public engagement strategy is a really good start, and COP26 that the Cabinet Secretary mentioned earlier presents a fantastic opportunity for us to engage with the people of Scotland, and it's an opportunity we really can't afford to miss. Our research shows that 48% of homeowners would like to carry out improvements, but found it difficult to access the advice or information they need. 38% also think it would be too difficult to organise. So homeowners need support, and it's not necessarily just financial support they need. They need advice, information, and sometimes hand-holding to navigate what can be quite a complex environment. In particular, for people in flats, the government's commitment to take forward the recommendations of the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group on Tenement Maintenance is particularly important, so we don't end up with people living in flats being left behind. But advice and information will only go so far, and there is a clear expectation amongst our research participants that the Scottish Government will fund a significant proportion of the costs. And this is a real challenge, and the range of financial incentives and support will be critical in enabling homeowners to improve their homes. And with the finite resources available, we need to make sure that these are appropriately targeted to ensure that people are on low incomes are not pushed into fuel poverty, and that we have a just transition to net zero. And finally, there's a high level of uncertainty, and this is a major barrier to people investing in their homes. We need a robust consumer protection system to help homeowners and private landlords to identify the right tradespeople and trust that the advice they receive is accurate and appropriate. And there also needs to be a clear route to redress for when things do go wrong, so that consumers have confidence to make the investment needed to achieve net zero by 2045. Okay, thank you. And I shall unshare my screen if I can.
Thank you, Gillian. That was really, really interesting, and there's loads of detail in there. We're running slightly behind time now, so I'm not sure if we've got time for questions, and I don't see anybody's hands up. What I would say is the research is available on the Scottish Housing Day website. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go and get a copy, and we'll also send out a link as feedback after the event to all the delegates. There was a question there about what the bulk of emissions are made up of. If 13% of emissions come from homes, where does the rest come from? In the report itself, there's a link to Scottish Government statistics on emissions, which I will not pretend are easy to understand. It took the Housing Day partners quite a while to work out exactly where the 13% came from, so it's complicated. But I think, as Tony Kane says further down the chat, most of the bulk of the emissions are made up from transport, business, industry, manufacturing. So that's all available in the report, and the report is online. I think it would be quite interesting to hear about whether that report and the findings of the research resonate with anybody in the room, not as housing professionals or practitioners, but as tenants or homeowners. You know, do you think about the energy efficiency of your home? Have you thought about investing in it? Do you know what that will cost? It would be interesting if you want to kind of put your comments in the chat. But I think for now, we're going to have to say thank you to Gillian and move on to our next speaker, to try and keep us on time today. Thank you very much, Gillian. And next up we have David Simpson, who's the Head of Housing and Communities at Dundee City Council. David is speaking on behalf of ALATCHO, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, and he's going to be looking at some of the challenges and some of the solutions that different local authorities are taking across Scotland. I'm hoping David's here. I have a presentation for David, which I'm just going to get up now.
First slide, Ashley, that would be great.
You are there, okay. Let me get your presentation here.
Okay. Thanks, Ashley. Hi everyone, I'm David Simpson. I'm Head of Housing and Communities at Dundee City Council, and this afternoon I'm speaking, as Ashley says, on behalf of ALATCHO, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll outline how local authorities across the country are working to address energy efficiency and the switch to low or zero carbon heating against the backdrop of the climate emergency. Local authorities are committed to our role in this process, but feel it's important to highlight that there are risks that the sector needs to be aware of and demands that it needs to challenge in the interest of our tenants. By way of scene setting, we are, everyone agrees, in a climate emergency, and carbon emissions, including those from homes, need to be reduced. And the environmental impact ratings from EPCs, social rented house with a band C rating will contribute about 2.5 tonnes of carbon per year, compared to the average for all residential properties of 6 tonnes per year. We need to decarbonise how we heat our stock, but we need to get it right, or we risk driving up fuel poverty by installing heating systems that don't deliver affordable heating, that damage the stock through poor insulation and air tightness works, and reduce air quality through ineffective ventilation. There are also innovation risks. Being the first to adopt particular technologies before they're fully developed and tested, leading on new and expensive technologies so that others in the programme can benefit from lower prices and better tested products further down the line. Tenants in the social rented housing sector, as Ashley said earlier, have already invested heavily in improvement in their homes. They can't also be asked to take such risks on for owners and private landlords. The good news is that the recently published ZEST report highlights the need for a measured approach which focuses on benefits to tenants, including a just transition, ensuring that rents remain affordable, fuel poverty is reduced, and that other sectors that have a greater impact on the climate respond appropriately. The fabric first approach, reducing the need for heating before changing how we heat. Skills development matched any new approaches to ensure works are done to a high standard and that high quality jobs are created in the process, and working with tenants and communities to develop a shared understanding of the way we heat and run our homes. The next few slides are just a few examples from across the country of where local authorities are working on new and innovative approaches. Next slide, please, Ashley. Right, okay. In the last 7 years, Dundee City Council has applied external wall insulation as part of our Fabric First approach to energy efficiency to almost 5,000 homes, just over half of which are council houses. I say houses, but approximately 70% of all our social rented housing in the city is flatted accommodation with significant levels of right to buy sales, leading to a great many mixed tenure tenements across the city. Expenditure totaling approximately £50 million, including £16 million of HEAP's ABS funding and £3 million of eco funding, has been devoted to covering owners' costs in mixed tenure estates and has seen significant areas of the city transformed while reducing fuel poverty. EWI focuses on our solid wall stock. As we near the end of that programme, we're now turning our attention to our cavity wall insulated properties and, where appropriate, some internal wall insulation solutions. The challenge of East2 and net zero is a significant one, given that the vast majority of our council stock now has gas combi boilers, providing affordable, reliable heating, and the level of fuel poverty in the city is reducing. In addition to external wall insulation, we've installed district heating systems based around communal gas boilers in 10 of our multi-storey developments and in some adjacent low-rise housing, making homes easier to heat for all of our residents. At present, we're exploring alternatives to gas-fueled heating and have some concerns about potential running costs of some of the more innovative approaches to enhanced energy efficiency and how this may impact our tenants. The next one, please, Ashley. The next slide, when it comes up, is about some practical issues to consider potentially when you're looking at changing heating systems. So standard setup for on-grid social housing would normally consist of a gas combi boiler, standard radiators, and an electric shower to provide backup for hot water in the event of boiler breakdown. To switch to an air source heat pump, for example, would require some significant changes in order that heating and hot water remain affordable for tenants. An air source heat pump consists of an external unit and a hot water cylinder for water storage, both of which will require to be accommodated somewhere. To run effectively, the output temperature of the hot water should be around 45 degrees, meaning radiators may need to have a larger surface area, and we may need underfloor heating installed to ensure enough heat is emitted to make it comfortable for residents. Change of shower may also be recommended to make use of the hot water generated by the heat pump. If switching from the electric shower, this may cause disruption as a hot water feed to the location of the shower may be required. Given the cost of electricity at this time, it may be an idea to install photovoltaic cells and battery storage to offset the cost of running the heat pump. Just some potential practical issues. Have the next one, please, Ashley. So the next slide is Stirling Council. So Stirling Council started a large-scale photovoltaic solar panel programme in 2009. Over the past 12 years, just over 4,000 installations have been completed from a council stock of 5,800 properties and at a cost of over £20 million. The impact has been dramatic, with over 10% of their stock now having an EPC rating of A, and less than 0.5% rated below band D. Council is now moving to a carbon target of an average of 2 tonnes per house per year as the next phase of its programme to address fuel poverty and achieve net zero. Next one, please, Ashley. This is a really good slide. I challenge anyone to read all of that and understand it, but I digress. The H100 project in Fife is a further example of how local authorities are innovating as a response to the climate emergency. In 2022, this partnership between Fife Council and Scottish Gas will deliver green hydrogen produced by offshore wind power to 300 homes in Leavenmouth. The project will be operational for 4.5 years until March 2027. Following the successful rollout of phase 1 of the network, It's intended to develop phase 2, which would have the capacity to supply an additional 1,000 homes, thus provide commercial, industrial and transport opportunities for the greater use of hydrogen. Hydrogen is not without its critics, but the sector is part of a process to test this area of innovation, measuring its impact against the objectives of decarbonisation and a just transition. Next one, please, Ashley. So I think there's 2 slides to go, and the last 2 are about the Queen's Quay water source heat pump project in Clydebank, which is further evidence of the exciting new chapter in Scotland's heating network infrastructure. And it's the first major water source heat pump project of its kind in the UK. The scheme consists of 2 2.65 megawatt water source heat pumps, 120,000 litres of thermal storage, and 2 7 megawatt backup gas boilers to add resilience and contribute to the expected 20 megawatt peak demand. It's expected that the heat pumps and thermal store will be capable of delivering over 80% of peak demand in the area to be covered. The energy centre has also been designed with capacity for 2 further heat pumps in the future, with the potential to supply heating and cooling to the Golden Jubilee Hospital when complete. The system will deliver heat through a 2.5 kilometre district heating network across a 23-hectare development, with the potential to serve 1,000 private homes, 200 rented homes, and associated infrastructure, such as health centres and commercial facilities. Is there a second slide, Ashley? Yeah, so that's just a little more information on that. I have a little bit more I could share with you, and this is really for the techies on the call today. The system works by pumping up to 160 litres of water per second into 2 ammonia-based heat pumps. This captures low-grade heat in the river water ranging from 6 to 12 degrees, which is then boosted via a refrigeration cycle and can achieve temperatures of up to 80 degrees if needed. Now, I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds really impressive, doesn't it? My final comments today, by way of summing up, are just to give you some bullet points to maybe take away and think about. Social housing sector is committed to meeting the challenges posed by the climate emergency. Tenants and their interests must remain central to the process that we're working our way through at the minute. There are a variety of technologies out there, and it's likely that we will require to see innovation across all of them. And finally, in the context of this extremely important issue, a balance will need to be struck between right and quick if we're to deliver a just transition to net zero for all of our tenants. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. I'll just stop sharing these slides. Oh, hopefully that's me back. That was really, really interesting. I think it gives a good flavour of the kind of the different approaches being taken across local authorities, from looking at individual homes and the energy efficiency and the heating systems, but to these big infrastructure projects that are going to involve lots of different partners, the local authority, the energy companies, manufacturers, the residents, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Just have a look here to see if there are any questions for you. In the meantime, David, I guess just, do you think that net zero by 2045 is achievable? Can we do it?
Yeah, I think it will be a challenge. I think everyone in the call will feel it'll be a challenge. I think there's definitely a commitment to try and get there. The other discussion earlier, for instance, some of the stuff the Cabinet Secretary was saying, we need to work through and see how we do this together. We're talking about local authority tenants, social rental tenants. Was touched on earlier about owner-occupiers. There's a significant challenge out there about the kind of mixed tenure setup that we have. But speaking for Alacho, I think we can say we're committed to trying to get there, but we need to get there, keeping the interests of our tenants at the centre of what we do. Thanks, David. And there is actually a comment there from Paul Bellamy. He's asked if there is enough suppliers and installers geared up. So we're talking about skilled staff. Do we have enough people to actually install and maintain these systems going forward? I'm not sure if that's a question for you, David, but if you want to respond. I'm not really seeing it as a question about any specifics I've raised, because there might well be other people on the call who could talk about the individual examples. But I think one of the points I was trying to make in the presentation was that there will need to be new skills amongst the relative workforces, and those need to be identified early in the process so we can start getting those streams going, so that we have a pipeline of skilled staff doing skilled jobs and getting paid a decent wage for it, so that we can move some of these issues forward. I think one of the concerns is that with anything that's new, there might be some failures. There might be some initiatives that don't particularly deliver what you would hope they do. So you want to make sure you're backing the right horse, I guess, is the main point.
Thanks, David. Plenty for people to think about, and we will be sending around the slides after the event, so you can have a look in more detail at those really complicated diagrams that David shared with us. Thank you very much, David. We'll move on to our next speaker now. We've got Callum Murray, who's the Director of CCG Scotland, and Callum's going to talk to us about the development industry, manufacturing and building the homes of the future. I did see Callum before. Are you here, Callum?
Yes, I'm here, Ashley. Can you?
Yep, I can hear you.
Can you see me now?
I can't see your video, but we can hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Right, on you go, Callum.
Someone says it's better not to be seen anyway, actually. So maybe I can just hide the other end of the camera here. I'll carry on if I may. As introduced, I'm Director of CCG Scotland and Managing Director of CCG Homes. I also currently represent our business as a Commissioner on the Edinburgh Climate Commission, and we're currently feeding back to the City in its draft 2030 climate strategy, which was published in June this year. In addressing the forthcoming changes within the built environment, this is as good a place as any to open, to exemplify the scale, the nature of the task at hand, and how CCG as a business are addressing it for and with one of our biggest clients. For Edinburgh, change lies at the fulcrum of their strategy, and whilst modifying culture and habits usually a marathon, the city's in for a sprint, and it's set the bar considerably high, as has Glasgow, under intent to deliver a net zero city by 2030, so significantly ahead of the targets set by Holyrood and Westminster. In a post-pandemic economy of competing demands for scarce resources, if the emerging strategy is to be anything more than a wish list, it will demand assertive leadership, policy resolve, innovation of thought and technology, and unparalleled financial dexterity. The strategy adopts a preventative moral compass by commending design of net zero into the building fabric and the culture of the city. I wish I'd come up with that phrase, but that's the key objective. It will drive improved energy efficiency and decarbonisation of homes and buildings, from which a quarter of all carbon emissions are currently produced. Accordingly, it's acknowledged that the retrofit of the built environment presents an early and absolutely essential focus if the 2030 ambition is to be realised. The complexity of the task is far from low-hanging fruit. New build to some extent is. Retrofit presents significant operational and logistical challenges in assembling a skills base and a supply chain that will ensure efficient and cost-effective delivery and installation. Technical challenges are defined by the sheer physical scale and structural change that decarbonisation implies, particularly in a rich heritage context such as Edinburgh. But for Edinburgh, read Glasgow, read Dundee, read our other cities, our other towns. Technical challenges are defined by the sheer physical scale, as I say, and moreover, multiple ownership patterns will frustrate the implementation, and that would suggest decant or household living in situ, where change pivots around them. So a lot of discomfort. Retrofit solutions, as yet, are largely in prototype. We've been involved in a few, but will involve the installation of non-gas heating systems and improved thermal insulation across floors, walls, windows and roofs. It's going to be highly disruptive, and it's going to demand popular consensus, particularly with owner-occupiers and private property owners. And I can only resonate with some of the findings that have been presented earlier this afternoon in the survey. It'll be highly expensive, and particularly within the city's older tenement stock. And again, for Edinburgh Reid Glasgow. In this regard, Edinburgh too is committed to a just transition. For the average person, success will be governed by affordability. Again, not just true for Edinburgh, but Scotland. In new build, the challenge is complex, but the means are better understood. And as I say, to some extent, it could be described as the low-hanging fruit because new build housing is already ahead of the game in many respects. But perhaps the change that are planned are not understood yet widely enough, particularly at SME level in our industry. Change will be fairly rapid though and driven by the forthcoming amendments to the building regulations. And as suggested, they require installation of non-gas space and water heating solutions in new build housing from 2024. The associated heat standard remains to be confirmed, but the consultation paper that was out earlier this year suggested a metric that's significantly more efficient than current levels of demand. If it's introduced, it will fundamentally change the way that our homes are currently designed and built and dictate a near passive standard level of construction that will require significant fabric enhancement and the installation of mechanical extract ventilation as a norm. Early determination of these metrics, and I would suggest within the next year, is an absolute policy imperative if the housing and construction sector and the supply chain is to adequately plan for and respond to this change. Project lead-in timescales for us, from a blank sheet of paper, average about 18 months duration. So time's not on our side for 2024. In this sense, it's right on top of us, but the response needs to consider much, much more than just design. With additional build costs likely to be in excess of 10%, how's it going to be met? Typically, home buyers don't differentiate properties based on emissions, and as yet surveyors don't value low carbon properties any more highly, despite the fact they cost less to run. So a fresh look at property valuation practice will be an essential part of the mix, and perhaps EPCs need to become more integral to and drive valuation. Within the same relatively short time frame, lenders, warranty providers and insurers are all going to be required to be satisfied in product performance, safety and durability, and that's a sector that doesn't move quickly. Consider the progress during Grenfell by some of the providers that I've just named. Change, though, no more so impacts on our consumers, so we need to be sold on the benefits of the planet before the pocket. Heat pumps are the likely prevailing technology. They're not new, but the market's almost totally unfamiliar with the product in use, and as yet, less than 40% are manufactured in the UK. Priming the market and the consumer to adapt and value and pay for sustainability presents a far bigger challenge than just designing it in. Financial incentives will be essential, and these will lie with government to introduce. It's in key areas such as this that differential planning horizons, Edinburgh and Glasgow's 2030 objective, the Scottish Government's 2045, National Government 2050. These are likely to present the obstacles, the key obstacles to early targets being set and achieved. Change, though, is coming. And in my experience, you can either choose to embrace it or be consumed by it. When the First Minister alerted us to the climate change emergency, CCG were already on the case, assessing both the challenge and the opportunity. With lead-in timescales, as I suggested, 18 months normal duration, we are building 1,500 houses a year. We recognise the need to understand the implications early. We're fortunate in our business that over a decade ago, we were able to invest at the height of a recession in an off-site manufacturing capability that provides the perfect platform from which to develop fabric-first strategy and an approach to net zero. And the business has got a pipeline of over 1,000 homes under pilot with 4 local authority partners and a number of RSLs. The short video that I'm now going to ask Ashley to exhibit will demonstrate the development of our approach thus far and the extent of change ahead in the delivery of new homes. I do hope you can see the video. I'm not worth a look.
I hope we can too, Callum. We're now going to move seamlessly to the video clip, which I practiced earlier and it definitely did work. So let's see.
The climate crisis is one of this generation's biggest challenges. In response, Scotland is committed to becoming a net zero economy by 2045. For new house building, decarbonisation will commence as early as 2024, requiring rapid alignment of policy with construction resources, methods and technology to ensure essential targets are met. The climate is changing. The industry is responding. At CCG, we passionately believe in a more sustainable and progressive future for house building. Having pioneered the off-site manufacture of timber systems in Scotland for over a decade, we continue to develop our product by improving quality standards and thermal performance with the aim of reducing carbon emissions, energy demand and fuel poverty. We are now proud to introduce the CCG Net Zero Home. Designed to the Scottish building regulations under use of the standard assessment procedure, the performance of each home is measured in terms of energy use, CO2 emissions and cost. To achieve operational net zero, the dwelling emissions rate requires to be less than or equal to zero, with dynamic simulation modelling used to measure regulated operational energy performance across space heating, domestic hot water, lighting and ventilation solutions. In this process, we have designed a basis for net zero delivery that is practical, affordable and scalable for any residential development. Adopting a fabric-first approach, the starting point is our IQ Timber system, a panelised wall solution that integrates with low U-value components and combines with floor and roof cassettes to improve airtightness and reduce heat loss. Having optimised the building fabric, solar panels are applied to the roof to capture energy from the sun. The system can be augmented by battery storage, which allows the consumer to benefit from excess generation and deliver annual energy savings of up to £460. Future non-gas requirements have led us to consider alternative low-carbon heating technologies. The adoption of air source or ground source heat pumps can be specified on an individual basis or as a communal system that combines with conventional distribution to deliver hot water services and space heating. Decentralised mechanical extract ventilation provides a cost-effective and easy-to-use alternative to mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. The system permits both comfortable levels of airtightness and continuous airflow throughout the home. With lower carbon emissions, lower space heating demand and lower energy bills, the environment and communities of Scotland can move towards a more sustainable and progressive future, designed and built by CCG. The CCG Net Zero Home. The home of the future, today.
I hope you could all see and hear that. We will be sending out a copy of the video clip to everybody after the event. But I think that's just showing some of the different kind of technologies and the different types of energy efficiency measures that CCG are working with. And there's maybe just time for one or two questions if anybody wants to ask Callum. I guess I'd just be interested in hearing, Callum, if these kind of innovations in technology and manufacturing are being driven by consumers, or do you think it's being driven by regulation? Are you seeing demand from people on the ground? Or is it more to do with meeting targets?
Fundamentally, it's been driven by regulation, emerging regulation, Ashley. But in response to that regulation, rather typically the affordable housing sector has stood up to be counted. It's led in the past and it's leading today. The 1,024 units that we've got in pilot, as I mentioned, they're being delivered for 4 major local authorities: Edinburgh, North Lanarkshire Council, West Dunbartonshire Council and East Ayrshire Council. And there are significant programmes that are sitting behind that, driving the outputs. So the pilots are absolutely fundamental because we need to prototype. There will be mistakes made in the currency of this. I used to work for a national house builder, and when we changed our house types, we didn't build 100, we built 1 and made sure we got that right before we kicked that off. We're rather in that sort of zone just now, where I've got no wish to make mistakes on site, but we've invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and some real specialist expertise in collaboration with Edinburgh and the Scottish Government, with whom we're working on the Edinburgh demonstrator, to advance the technology and advance the understanding, both in terms of design and cost. But yes, it's been driven in the first instance by the emerging regulation in response to the climate emergency.
Thanks, Callum. Just one very quick question, because we need to have enough time for Sam for our last presentation. How close are we to Passive House as standard, rather than the exception to the rule?
Passive House is standard. If the heat energy standard that was cited in the consultation paper at the turn of the year is driven forward, that will take the industry across all sectors to a passive or near passive standard of delivery. I'm not sure that the industry is ready for the implementation of that within the timescales available. 2024, as I've suggested, is right round the corner, and fundamentally changing the manner in which we build at that speed for the sector would be quite a considerable challenge.
Thanks, Callum. Some big challenges ahead. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your video as well. We're going to move swiftly on now to Sam Mills. We're running slightly behind time, but want to make sure that we give Sam the full 15 minutes. So hopefully people can stay to the end and just stay with us for an extra 5 minutes or so. Sam Mills is the head of fuel poverty reduction at Changeworks, and Sam is going to round off the event today by reminding us that we need to think of the residents and the tenants when we're talking about investing billions of pounds in energy efficiency and meeting net zero targets. And the term just transition has come up consistently throughout all the presentations today. So Sam, I will hand over to you. Do you have some slides for us, or?
Take myself on mute, that would help first.
Thanks,
Let's see if I can share this. Right.
Thank you.
Marvellous. Okay, thank you everybody. Good to be here this afternoon. I am just going to give you kind of a brief overview of some experiences that we've had working with tenants. But first of all, for those of you who don't know who Changeworks is, we are we're Scotland's leading environmental charity delivering positive solutions for low carbon living. So our vision is that we have a world where everyone is able to live, work and enjoy life with a low carbon impact. And we have over 30 years experience working with partners across Scotland to find practical ways to accelerate energy efficiency, deploy renewable and low carbon solutions, and deliver integrated community approaches, and also tackle fuel poverty issues. We have over 200 employees and volunteers working across Scotland, and for this session I'm going to talk through the importance of tenant engagement when designing programmes of work and providing an advice and support for tenants when installing new systems and new technologies. So just first, a bit of a background. Changeworks delivers an affordable warmth service with advisors, trained advisors, providing holistic one-to-one advice and advocacy to support householders that are struggling with their fuel bills, to help them to gain better control of their energy use, their energy bills, and deal with fuel debt. And we have an empowering approach that ideally helps householders gain sustainable life skills to tackle fuel poverty themselves in the future. 2/3 of the people that our affordable warmth services support are social housing tenants, and the majority of cases that we are supporting people with are generally around themes of high energy bills, those who are in threat of disconnection and or in energy debt. And the majority of our work is reactionary, so it's supporting people who are already at crisis, and our work is generally a firefighting approach or a firefighting support that we're having to provide. Slide won't move on. So our own experience, our delivery experience, is backed up by a short consultation we did with our stakeholders, and we received a number of responses from local authority, housing providers and housing associations. And from this, we know that virtually all respondents consider energy issues to be important or very important with their clients. And we know that 80% of clients are struggling to pay their energy bills that are referred to our service. So a very high proportion of the people that they support and the people that they work with are struggling with their fuel bills and hence are referred to us. So this got us thinking, what if we could engage with tenants at a key point when our support could help prevent some of the crisis cases that are being referred to us? So with support from 3 social housing providers, we consulted with nearly 400 social housing tenants who had moved into their property within the last 12 months. And from that, we learnt that 80% were concerned about their energy prices, over half were not confident they were on the best tariff, and just under half were unsure how to use their heating, although that rose to 57% for first-time tenants. And I guess what I should flag to you is this research was actually done about 6 years ago. So over half of first-time tenants were telling us that they were unsure how to use their heating, but at that point in time, it was unlikely that the heating that they were talking about would be the technologies that the new renewables and decarbonised technologies that we're talking about at the moment. So we also asked these tenants what types of advice they would like to receive when they move into their new home, and 91% said they would like advice on how to use their heating systems. Over 2/3 said they would have benefited from advice on understanding their energy meter, their bills, setting up an energy account, and budgeting tips and how to avoid energy debt. So working with the housing associations that we did the research, which we then delivered a project called Canny Tenants that looked to target new tenants and deliver preventative energy advice soon after the tenant had moved in. And that project ran for 5 years and it finished just in March of this year. And many learnings, but some of the key learnings was actually taking a preventative engagement approach was not that straightforward. So preventative working at that time was not the norm, and we realised that a different approach and a different language was needed. And what is key in all of this is that the process needs to be normalised as part of the new tenant journey. And as part of that, we also learnt that closer collaborative working and actually co-locating our staff with the housing associations helped to facilitate the partnership working much more closely. So I'm highlighting this because this is research and a project that we ran where tenants were telling us they were struggling with the heating system, struggling with their bills, struggling with their meters, and it's highly likely that they were struggling with the heating systems and technologies that are more commonplace. What I want to do now is just touch on a project that was run and that was delivered by Warmworks. So Warmworks is the Scottish Government funded insulation and heating measures programme, and they ran a project last year and into the early part of this year, working with a housing association in Dumfriesshire, looking at installing batteries that would be connected to time of use tariff learnings. Now, Changeworks conducted the monitoring and evaluation for this project, and Changeworks at the moment is involved in quite a number of decarbonisation technology projects under the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme. So we're working with housing providers delivering air source heat pump, photovoltaic and battery projects, And I had hoped that we would have some monitoring and evaluation data from that, but we're not going to have that data until later on in the year. So I thought I would talk about this report, and I have provided the link to the report. The report is in the public domain, and the link is at the bottom if you wanted to go and read the report yourself. As I said, we undertook the research on behalf of Warmworks, and so the project was to identify 150 properties to install batteries, and the properties were all off-grid. There were many learnings, and some of them were technical learnings, which I'm not going to delve into, but I've just pulled out some of the learnings from the tenants that and working with the tenants that were living in these properties. So one of the first learnings was that helping the tenants to switch to time of use tariffs took a lot of time and support, and that's because people didn't fully understand what a time of use tariff is, or what it actually meant for them and how they could get the best out of it. There was also lots of support needed for the meter exchange, so meters needed to be changed for them to be able to access the time of use tariff, and there turned out to be quite a lot of complications with the suppliers. There was erroneous readings, and there were suppliers who were either unable to change the arrangements or in some instances unwilling to change the arrangements for the householder. So they were either unable or unwilling to change the tariff or the meter, which meant effectively that the batteries were kind of redundant, really, because they weren't able to access the time of use and the cheaper tariff to charge. Post-installation surveys also highlighted that householders wanted more information at the point of installation or just after the installation. So prior to installation, 96% of the householders had been happy, but at the end of the process, this had dropped to 65%. And additionally, once the batteries had been installed, follow-up work discovered that not all the householders had adapted to the time of use tariffs. They still weren't fully aware of how to make use of the time of use tariffs, and they were still using additional heaters, which were then leading to an increase in fuel bills and an increase in fuel poverty. So a lot more follow-up advice was needed. So I guess just to finish off, we've heard of the various standards that are coming in, ESH2 standards and the decarbonisation agenda. Now, this will mean that social landlords are needing to effectively deploy renewable and low carbon solutions, and these are systems that not everyone is familiar with. There are many factors that need to be taken into account when determining the appropriate technology. So, for example, the energy efficiency of the property, the existing heating type. So, for example, we know at the moment that moving people from gas central heating to technologies such as air source heat pumps is likely to increase people's heating costs without the required behaviour change or lifestyle changes. We also need to look at things like existing payment types and tariffs, as these may also need to change. And we also need to take into account householder needs. So, for example, somebody with significant visual impairment will struggle or may well struggle to engage with the controls of the technology that they've had installed. And as I've mentioned, lifestyle amendments are also needed. Behaviour change is going to be needed for people to adapt to use these new technologies. So it is vital that tenants are provided the necessary advice and support to ensure they understand how to get the most out of the new system. Otherwise, it's entirely possible they're going to end up in an even worse situation than they were before. And this is something that Changeworks has experienced repeatedly. And I guess I would say that the decarbonisation, the technologies that we're installing, they're actually only as good as the people who can use them and their ability to understand how to use them and get the best out of them. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Sam.
No problem. Let me...
Such an important point to note when we're talking about upgrading millions of homes, really significant changes to heating systems, making sure that people have the advice and the support that they need. Sam, I'm getting feedback. Is your microphone still on? think, yep, that's better. If anybody's got a question for Sam about her presentation or about the work that ChangeWorks does, please put up your hand or put it in the chat box. I guess I'll just start by asking you, Sam, I mean, the track record on fuel poverty reduction has not been great. There was a statutory target to have eliminated fuel poverty as far as practicably possible by 2016, and we still have over 500,000 households living in fuel poverty. We've got a new statutory target to have reduced fuel poverty to no more than 5% of households by 2040. Can we do it? And what is needed to do it at this time when we are looking at zero carbon, installing all of these different measures into people's homes? How do we make sure that we're tackling fuel poverty at the same time?
Well, as we all know, sorry, can I just confirm you're not getting any feedback while I'm talking? You can hear me okay, great. Well, I mean, we all know that there are the 4 different factors that cause fuel poverty, and ultimately, if you want to help householders not live in fuel poverty, you need to, excuse me, address all 4 factors, and ideally you need to address all 4 factors at the same time. And I would say there are a number of programs that are not necessarily linked up and communicating well with each other. And there are a number of drivers that are, that are competing priorities. So we have the decarbonisation agenda, which is a significant priority for us to meet our climate change targets. But if we just focus on the technology and the carbon reduction, the householders are potentially going to get left behind. We have employability schemes and benefit schemes that know who, they have the data on who low-income households are, people who are on benefits. Getting all these schemes to work together to enable householders to get the most support that they can, I think is the ideal in being able to address fuel poverty.
Thanks, Sam. Just going to give a final call for any questions for Sam. And I don't see any hands up, so I think all that's left to do for the session is to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all of our speakers, to the Cabinet Secretary, to Gillian, David, Callum and Sam. Thank you again to ACO for supporting the research that was published today. We want to keep the discussion going on housing in the climate emergency, so please continue to share your stories and pictures on Twitter today and beyond today with the hashtag Scottish Housing Day. And you can also take a look at the website scottishhousingday.co.uk. There's information and resources there. We've also added a new page to the website with case studies showcasing projects from across the housing sector, so you can find some inspiration there. Or if you'd like to add your own project, please get in touch and we can look at getting that up on the website too. We want to keep updating the website up to COP26 and beyond, because this is just the beginning of the conversation. As we've heard today, there's a big challenge ahead and we've got a long way to go to meet net zero. So this is just the start. So we would be delighted to hear from you about all the projects and the contributions that you're making. And that is all from me. I hope you've really enjoyed the day. So thank you again to all of you and to all of our speakers, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.